21,443, that is how many red light runners were detected at 5 Christchurch intersections during 2024. The worst was the intersection of Pier Street, Yaldhurst and Curlitz roads, where 12,336 drivers ran a red light. The red light runners were detected by NZTA's installed detectors under intersections across the city. But there are only 2 red light cameras in Christchurch. And these intersections do not feature in the top 15 for detecting red light runners. City Council Transport Operations Manager Stephen Wright says that they are aware red light camera and safety cameras are a priority, adding we understand that the earliest they would be able to consider putting more in as part of their work program will be next year. Now, red light running remains a significant concern, not just for Christchurch, but all of New Zealand. And over the years, it has led to fatalities. However, the penalty for doing so is, in my humble opinion, too low, $150. There are calls for more red light cameras, of course, to be installed, but also to increase the cost of the infringement. A Star News poll showed 85%, in fact, in favour of stronger penalties. I mean, it's got to be serious if we're actually putting our hands up and say, yes, we should pay more. Only 15% wanted no change. Breaking down the further results further, 70% want fines to increase from 150 to 300 and demerit points introduced. And while 15% just want demerit points for and no fine increase. So what should be done? Terry Collins is AA's Transport Principal Policy Advisor, and it's good to have him back on the show. G'day, Terry.
Afternoon, Leah.
Terry, 21,443 red light runners. I mean, that's big for Christchurch, but it isn't a problem solely facing Christchurch, is it?
No, it's not. And I'd point out that also that's only the ones with cameras on it. So imagine what some of the other intersections that don't have cameras, what those figures possibly could be.
Yeah. Good point. The current fine, as I said, $150, which I think is low. What does it compare to other countries, and what do you think, or the AA think, it should be set at?
The AA thinks, the National Council think they are far too low. If we were to even double them, we would only be just meeting what they were when they were set in 1999, 26 years ago. So what's happened is inflation over that period has just diminished the effect that that sanction has on speeders. It's not changing the behaviours. It's probably at a price point. It sounds terrible to talk economics like this, but really that's what the fines are meant to do. They're supposed to incentivise behaviour change by making them punitive. Now, our Australian counterparts, New South Wales, I think it's around about $481. It's a bit over $600 in Queensland, and a little bit lower in Victoria. So that gives the magnitude that they're at least 3 times what we've currently got. But I think the other thing to think about is, have we got our fines right? The AA wants the government to have a fundamental look at some of the ways that some of the penalties of what they incur. Example would be the red light runner. Now, they appear really high statistically in causing deaths and serious injuries. That's why we want to slow them down. Yet it's only $150. You don't have a war on a fitness, that's $150. So how could having maybe a car on a minor fault equate to the same as having a statistically high chance of killing or hurting somebody? So AA thinks penalties, where it increases the risk of actually something seriously happen by the driver's behaviour, willful behaviour, then those penalties should be higher.
What if we're going to I want to stick to the red lights and demerits, but obviously to go further, because that is interesting. If you're asking the government to kind of look at all of the penalties, what then for using your phone? Because isn't that also $150?
Yeah, and
they seem to have settled on $150.
Yep, and that's an example of what I was saying, because you're 6 times more likely to be involved texting than you are impaired by alcohol. And you look at the fines for alcohol, and you look at that. And so that relates to those safety and crash principle regime I was just mentioning.
So hang on, you're 6 times more likely to have an accident or cause an accident while you're texting than if you were over the limit.
You are, because generally you've got your head down, you're not looking, you're distracted, which is a major cause. The drunk driver, even though he may be impaired, may trying to consciously think I'm going to do a good job, even though he's doing a bad job, but at least he's trying. I beg to say, when you got your head down texting somebody, not looking at, you're not really trying to drive.
And what Terry, would you be comfortable with, or the AA be comfortable with, say, for being caught texting? Because in Australia, let's go back across the ditch, isn't it well over 1,000?
Yeah, it can, and because they recognise the peril that presents to other drivers on the road.
Yeah. So, do you think we should be up there with that $1,000?
I think if I think of what the Australians also do, which is why they have these odd numbers like $481.
Yeah. What's
they
that
do
about?
a major review. Yeah, they do a major review of all the penalties for driving. They then try to align them in those principles I just mentioned. And then they link it to CPI like we do for alcohol and tobacco taxes. So the price goes up every year based on what the rate of inflation is. You never have to look at the system again or go back and set regulations about setting fines. You may tinker around those penalties that want to lessen or severe, but that'll be the only thing, over the outgoing decades. You're going to set up a whole system that kind of monitors and hopefully gets behaviour change.
Let's go back to, we are talking fines, but there's also growing public sentiment in favour of putting up the fines, but also adding demerit points is a double whammy, the way to go.
Yeah, the demerit points, the AA's been discussing that as well.
Yeah.
The difficult is it's a strict liability offence, which means it goes back, you only have to prove who the registered owner of the vehicle was at NZTA and you're liable for the fine. It doesn't necessarily mean you're the driver. And with anything like that, you may get, what does happen overseas, one of the fears on these, is because they can't identify the driver like a policeman can when he pulls you over. Yeah. When you're getting at risk of losing your licence, you make the wife take responsibility for it, because or you make a friend, or you buy somebody's favour, and then they go and say, I did it, they get the fine, they get the demerits, and the offender keeps your licence. So there are some concerns about that type of evasion.
Would never have thought of that, Terry. How do you describe the current attitude of drivers in New Zealand when it comes to the likes of red lights and traffic rules in general? Have our standards dropped?
We've got more traffic on the road, so it's presenting us more problems. I think there's frustrations at rush hour and moving through that, and some of the driver behaviour in a hurry. But I think it's a consequence of our fleet has probably got bigger than what our roading can handle right now. We need to make some kind of improvements around that. Sensible people tend to understand that, and they drive considerately. Yeah. And I see a lot of that. I do see the odd fall, for want of a better term, but they're few and far between. Most of the time when you realise when you've got to zip into intersections and when two lanes are going into one and you give way, that's great. But running red lights is that part of that frustration.